Hello, friends. It's great to connect with you again. Today, I've got a wild story to share about an HOA and a neighbor who thought my electricity was up for grabs. I've been levying in my current neighborhood for about 6 years now. When I first moved in, I was thrilled by the prospect of a quiet, tight-knit community where people looked out for each other. I knew there was a homeowners association. My real estate agent had warned me they could be a bit nitpicky, but the location was gorgeous, and the house had the perfect mix of yard space and seclusion. I run a small consulting business from home, so the peaceful setting was a huge plus. I still remember standing in my backyard that first day, picturing myself working by an open window or stepping out to tend my garden. It felt like paradise. Little did I know, it'd soon turn into a bizarre showdown over my outdoor outlets, pushy demands from a neighbor, and even a visit from the cops. Let's start with the spark that ignited this mess. My new neighbor, let's call him Greg, bought the lot next to mine about 8 months ago. It had been empty for a while because the previous owner wasn't ready to sell until last year. Greg's property sits slightly downhill from mine, so it wasn't surprising when his construction crew started storing equipment near our shared boundary for flatter ground. At first, I didn't care. Greg waved hello a few times, introduced himself as a carpenter, and said he was building a custom home. I was glad to see the vacant lot put to use and some new energy brought to our quiet cul-de-sac. But as weeks passed, what began as a friendly vibe morphed into a strange battle over my power supply. It all kicked off one morning when I spotted power tools plugged into one of my outdoor outlets. My stomach dropped. A thick extension cord stretched from my house, across the property line, and right to the half-built foundation on Greg's lot. I walked over, unplugged it, pulled the cord back, and carried it to the construction site. I asked the workers if they were Greg's crew or independent contractors. One guy shrugged and pointed to a man in a hard hat who seemed in charge. The lead, who introduced himself as Mike, said, "Greg told us we could use your outlet. He said you were cool with it." I was absolutely not cool with it. No one had asked me. I stayed calm and said, "Sorry, but this is news to me." Nobody checked if I was okay with this. Mike looked confused, swore Greg had cleared it with me, and promised they'd sort it out with him. I figured it was just a mix-up, and we left it on good terms with an agreement they wouldn't plug in again without talking to me first. Oh, how naive I was. Later that day, Greg showed up at my door, frowning. He explained that the power line the utility company set up for his site couldn't handle heavy-duty tools like saws and drills. He was waiting on an upgrade in a few weeks and, until then, was scrambling for a temporary fix. Then, casually, he asked if his crew could run a cord to my outlet for the time being. To me, that was a huge ask. I explained it'd jack up my electric bill, and I wasn't thrilled about footing the cost for his project. Plus, I wasn't sure it was even legal that you need a temporary power setup for construction. Greg brushed it off, saying it was just a few weeks, and he'd pay me back, acting like I was petty for hesitating. I might have considered it for a day or two if we'd been longtime buddies or if he'd approached me humbly from the start. But this felt wrong. Already told his crew it was fine without asking me. I said, "No, I'm not comfortable with that. You need to find a proper solution." He stormed off, muttering, "We'll figure it out," and I foolishly thought that was the end. A few days later, I caught them at it again. They'd plugged into an outlet behind my garage when I rarely check. When I saw the cord snaking over the fence during a backyard walk, I realized this wasn't a one-time request, it was entitlement. Furious, I yanked it out, marched over, and demanded to speak to Greg or someone in charge. Mike saw me coming and mumbled that Greg had insisted it was no big deal. I told him firmly, "This isn't okay. If it happens again, I'll call it trespassing or theft." Mike apologized, said Greg had misled him, and took the cord back. I hoped that'd settle it. Nope. Things escalated when I got a letter from the HOA president. Let's call her Susan. It claimed I was obstructing Greg's lawful construction by denying his crew reasonable access to shared amenities. I was floored. My outlet, on my property, behind my fence, wasn't shared. I went to Susan's house, a retired bookkeeper obsessed with neighborhood landscaping rules, and handed her the letter. "This is wrong," I said. "That's my private property, not a common area." She crossed her arms and said, "Greg told us you're refusing basic neighborly support. We're obligated to provide." I asked how my electricity was a community resource. She faltered, admitting Greg had told the HOA I was blocking a shared electrical box by my fence. A total lie. Flustered, she warned that the HOA might view me as uncooperative if I kept refusing. I showed her the bylaws. Nothing required sharing utilities. She doubled down, citing a vague CIVY clause and discretionary power. I told her I'd fight any fine and left. Sure enough, a $50 fine arrived for a lack of cooperation, threatening weekly increases if I didn't comply. I called the HOA treasurer, but he backed Susan. Then a friend tipped me off. Susan had sent a letter to all members, painting me as a selfish jerk delaying Greg's build. I considered a lawyer but hesitated at the cost. Instead, I went to the city permit office. A clerk named Tom said if Greg's permit required a temporary power line and he was using mine instead, it could violate codes. I filed a complaint, and Tom said an inspector would check within a week. Then, the weirdest twist, Susan and Greg called the police, claiming I was harassing the workers. An officer showed up, and I explained everything showed him my survey, the outlet, the cord's path. He agreed it was my property, not an easement, and said they couldn't force me to share. He talked to them, and if they kept trespassing, I could report it. The next day, Susan stormed over, accusing me of twisting the law and doubling my fine to do Law 100. I shut the door, consulted an attorney, and waited. The city inspector, Lisa, came by, confirmed Greg lacked proper power, and likely cited him. I saw him raging later, yelling about fines. Susan backed off after that, emailing that the HOA was dropping the issue. At the next meeting, I presented my case bills, bylaws, Lisa's email, and the board reversed the fines, forcing Susan to retract her lies. Greg later damaged my landscaping digging a trench without permits, earning a stop work order. He finished his house months late, over budget, and sold it soon after, possibly fleeing his reputation. Susan lost her HOA presidency in a no-confidence vote. I'm back to my quiet life, garden intact, with new friends from this mess. What a ride. See you soon, friends.